Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to cover something, and again, I'm going to reword this a little different than I've done in the past so that people kind of understand it, because not everyone has access to the ideal equipment I do. Some people have less stuff at their gym, so let's put this into simpler terms instead of just worrying about bands and chains and things like that. What people need to understand is that the basis of the max work in a system like the system of training I do is based upon the idea that if you get really, really strong at a variety of big exercises to the point where you can safely hit 1 rep maxes on them, and the safely is a key part of that, because by rotating exercises all the time, you actually avoid overuse injuries of maxing out every single week. And that's a key point that people need to understand. It cuts down on risk of overuse injuries. It's actually safer. And what you start to learn is that your different lifts carry over into each other. Now, I happen to do this with doing stuff like different bars, bands, chains versus straight weight. And these create different exercise variations. And I pick ones that are very specific to all my needs, and there's a lot of programming around all of it, but I could just as easily substitute other lifts in if I didn't have access to all the stuff I have. I would argue it might not be quite as beneficial in the long term. It wouldn't be as effective. But let's say you have access to less stuff. Let's say that for squatting, you have access to 5 types of squats, right? Because you only have a simple barbell, right? You have a simple barbell. And for your squats, you choose to train to maxes. You do a back squat. You might do a front squat. You can find a box to sit on. You can stack boxes. You could do a back squat with a barbell onto a box, or a box squat. You could do a front squat onto a box, and you could probably come up with something else. A Zercher squat. All right, let's say you literally only have a barbell and plates. All right, well, that's 5 forms of squats. 5 forms of squats you can do right there. Okay. In my case, I've got a lot of variation because of bands and chains. Let's say you come over to your deadlifting. The same sort of concept, right? Same sort of concept. You could do conventional deadlifts. You could do sumo deadlifts. You could do deficit sumo, deficit conventional. And you could find something else to do, right? Let's say you can't even find another form of deadlift. You can't find stuff to create maybe a small step the other direction. You could stack mats under the plates to raise it 2 inches to create a sumo that's a mild block pull. Or you could swap in a good morning and count it as a hip hinge. You could come up with 5 different exercises. Same thing for pressing, right? You've got the flat bench. You've got a closed grip bench. You could do an overhead press, a floor press, and maybe an incline press because you're stuck in a generic bro gym. You got those 5, and you could probably come up with different things you could add to it to the point to where you can find up to 10 heavy presses of some type. Maybe your gym has 1 specialty bar of some type somewhere, or you can find something else, a closed grip floor press. Right? You could come up with a way. So let's say you come up with 5 sorts of squats, 5 sorts of deadlifts, 10 sorts of presses, and you'd run a sort of max system to where you hit a max on a squat or a deadlift every week and a max on some sort of press every week, and you rotate through them and you just train them to a max. What would you get out of that? Number 1, you would get really good at maximum strength, and every week you would be doing basically a lower body dominant and an upper body dominant lift, even though there's some overlap, right? And you would be used to using maximum weights and hitting a max. What you would also find is that there would be a ratio between them, that you would start to find over several months that if your max goes up on one, you can predict if your max is going to go up on the next. In other words, you start to learn real quick that when you hit a 10-pound PR on the incline or on the floor press, that your bench goes up 10 pounds. You can start reliably predicting based upon each week's press or each week's squat or each week's deadlift how much the others are going to go up, because they're carryover. Most of these are supplemental lifts for the main lift. You would learn a pattern. And it doesn't matter what lifts you do. Strong is strong. If you get really brutally strong at multiple types of squats, pulls, and presses, what happens? You're going to be strong. You're going to be strong. Even if none of them happen to be, the conventional lifts. Would you still get strong? Of course you would. You've gotten used to hitting maxes on all those angles. You'd get strong. So what would happen then if we do the same thing? Essentially, the system is based around that. What if you start looking at each of those lifts every week? Because let's say you film them, you watch them, and you realize that on your floor press, you start to realize that your triceps are a weak link, or your upper back is a weak link. Same thing, you get to your overhead press and you realize that your side delts or the long head of your tricep are holding you back. You start looking at these different movements and thinking, okay, which muscles are my weakest muscles in this exercise? And then every week, whatever the weakest muscle seems to be, and sometimes you can go by feel. As you start to become more advanced as a lifter, a lot of times you can tell which muscles give out on a max effort lift. You know where you feel it hurt the most. You know where you feel it strain and give out, especially when you miss one of them. What would happen if you just came in every week and you did a bunch of hypertrophy work for that? Bunch of sets of 10 for that weak muscle. What would happen? It would get bigger and thicker. Well, if the weak muscle grows, we get stronger. We get stronger. Because, yes, size gives more strength potential. Some people argue, well, size doesn't always equal strength. It just gives the potential for more strength. But if you're training maxes on these lifts every week, then you are training the neuromuscular efficiency to maxes on the big movement patterns, right? To lifting really heavy as you can. You're developing the skill of lifting heavy. So if you're hypertrophying the smallest muscles and the weakest muscles every single time, by the time you get back around to hitting that big lift again, which you're practicing doing through rotations, what happens? It's probably going to get stronger because you've made the weakest muscles, the smallest muscles in the chain, grow. And instead of looking at this from the perspective of, oh, I'm just going to look at what's the weak link in my bench, we look at what's your weak link in 9 or 10 different presses. What's your weak link in 5 different types of squats? And if you keep correcting all those weaknesses, what happens? Do they carry over to each other? Yes. Because most coaches and lifters and every coach in the world will tell you these various supplemental lifts carry over to the main lifts, but vice versa. They all carry over to everything else. In other words, if you get really stronger at dips, does your bench go up? Yes. If you get really stronger at bench press, does your incline bench go up? Yes. You get really stronger at overhead press, does some of the other stuff go up and vice versa? Yes. Does the bench and the dip increase your overhead press? Usually a little bit, yeah. Do you see the point? Because you are getting strong at a wide variety of big lifts. But not just strong, you are maximizing your strength. You're training them with maximum weights. And maximum weight is the only way to develop maximum strength. But then on top of that, you're looking at each of those lifts and saying, okay, so I've decided I'm going to do the floor press or the front squat or the Zercher squat or whatever lifts that you are choosing to utilize. And then you're analyzing them and saying, but how can I get stronger at it? Okay, I hit a max on it today. I got a 365 Zercher squat. Which muscles are holding me back on the Zercher squat? Man, my whole middle back. I feel like my mid traps and my lower lats and all that are just giving out. Well, what happens if you just do a ton of training for those areas? Well, the Zercher squat's going to go up, and eventually maybe the quads will become the limiting factor. And if you sequentially do this on 20 different big exercises like we just described, are you going to be big and brutally strong eventually? Of course you are. You might not be compared to someone else, but compared to where you were, you will be. And if a man or a woman spends years going through methods like that to get as strong as possible at 20 different big exercises because they train them heavy and then they train the weak points around all of them because they say, how do I build my closed grip bench press? It seems to suck at this. What exercises will bring it up? And then you do a bunch of volume on those. If your system is designed around this basic principle and basic concept, wouldn't that work? Of course it would. So carry it over to what me and a lot of the guys do who are just using different bars and bands and chains and straight weight back and forth. We're doing the same thing. We're just training a bunch of different strength curves and acceleration curves that use muscles in a different pattern in all these big lifts. But if you get strong at all of them and you focus upon maximizing your strength at every one of these exercises, and you treat all of them like a competition lift, you treat every one of the lifts that you're ever going to do for backs as if they're a competition lift that needs their weak points corrected. Are you going to be weak at anything? No. No, because a person who has maximized their strength on 19 or 20 different big exercises is going to be strong at everything. That's the whole idea. Hopefully that makes more sense now. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.